welcome back to the TFR Podcast. We are back once again today to review the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix and then later on look ahead to the up-and-coming Brazilian Grand Prix, one of the favourites of the season. I think most people can agree. Welcome back, Luke, once again joining me on today's podcast. And how you doing? And did you enjoy the Mexican Grand Prix?
Yeah, definitely. It was a good race. Definitely a nice surprise from Ferrari, and we'll get more into it.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, you timed it well wearing the Ferrari hat, particularly with the Leclerc number 16, I think I can see on that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
So, but it was very much a good day, particularly for Leclerc in Mexico. But we'll start off with the big talking point on the big result, if you like, which was for Lando Norris. He obviously won and dominated the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix, despite a bit of a chaotic start, which again we'll get into, but a pretty dramatic four-way run into the first corner like we've seen many times before could have potentially curtailed Norris's pursuit of another victory this season, but it did not. He managed to scamper clear and didn't never look back. Got the largest winning margin of all season, beating even some of Verstappen's dominant victories of late. And now, incredibly, he takes the championship lead with 4 rounds remaining. It wasn't that long ago when he DNF'd during the Dutch Grand Prix, and it looked like an almighty mountain to climb for the British driver to catch his teammate Oscar Piastri. But in the space of some crazy races that we've had recently in terms of the results, Norris is back in the championship lead. I almost can't quite believe I'm saying that at this point in the season, Luke.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's not anything anyone expected, but Oscar Piastri has just had a string of bad results, and apparently he can't make the car perform consistently anymore. So I gotta say, I'm excited that Lando Norris is back in it, and Max Verstappen keeps on going up the order. It's really, really exciting. And honestly, I can't wait for these last couple of races because I really can't say what's going to happen at this point. 4 races left to go with literally any of them having a shot. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it is going to be a real thrilling end to the season, which we never really expected this. We've said this before on the podcast where we just thought this was going to be this straight fight between the McLarens, and we just would have to almost forensically look at the two McLaren drivers' performance each week. But Verstappen just keeping himself alive in this fight, and really with what another poor performance from Piastri in terms of his high standards, it just allows Max that little bit closer in terms of to both McLarens now, because obviously Norris is the new leader in the standings. But yeah, Verstappen, you know what? I actually thought this was potentially looking like a real banana skin, Luke, in terms of the actual result he was going to get, and he could have very easily not been on the podium. But to drag that third place, finish it, and it very easily could have been a second place if there wasn't that VSC, you'd have to say he was probably quite pleased with the result in the end.
I would expect so. He ultimately put in a great drive, and thankfully he didn't have that many positions to make up. If he was coming back from like P8, P7, honestly, then I don't think it would have been I don't think it would have been as possible, especially trying to get back through the Mercedes and everything. But yeah, he did very well, ultimately getting that P3, and I didn't think he was, or almost getting that P2, to be fair. Really cashing to Charles Leclerc there at the end. And yeah, I got to say, it was just a good strategy from Red Bull. They did something a little bit different, and I've got to say, it looked pretty good, and he looked pretty well put together there in the race.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into a little bit more of his race in a second, but kind of jumping back actually to Norris, what's been the biggest thing for you, Luke? This might be quite a tricky question to answer. The biggest thing that Norris has managed to change here in terms of his championship, because for a good bit of time it was looking like this wasn't meant to be this season, but now he's obviously in the lead.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and honestly, I'm willing to bet that it's just some car development. It looks like there has been some talk in the paddock about how the car was more well suited to Piastri at the beginning, and Norris was struggling, and now it looks like it's just the inverse of that. It looks like what Piastri or where Piastri was finding pace before is just not as easy. And that I don't know. And I think that's honestly just the biggest thing. I just keep hearing talks about that. I've seen articles on it. And, I think it's a good thing for Norris that, this car is going back in a direction that he can handle. But I do wonder if at the end of the day, that means that there is some inner team bias or anything like that, because clearly Piastri isn't gelling as well with the car. And he was honestly on a bit of a dominant streak earlier this season. It wasn't anything ridiculous. It was always still close between him and Norris at the end of the day at most of those races, especially when we go back to like Miami or Spain or Hungary. Or it was a Hungary or Belgium. Or I think he got Hungary and Belgium to be fair, but like we did see it was everything was pretty close. But yeah, Norris has just gotten more and more confidence through the season, and that's just kind of it. That car is now in his favor. Whatever characteristics they changed are exactly what it needed.
Yeah, and maybe you could say before the McLaren was quite a nervous car where if you push it too much, it kind of has a bit of a moment, or it can be a little bit unpredictable when kind
Mm-hmm.
of entering a corner, which clearly didn't suit Norris. But the car seems far more predictable to drive now. And yeah, I think you're probably right. There's probably been slight tweaks there that have helped Norris. I think as well, I mean, he's clearly just really locked in now in terms of going for that championship because Piastri, I mean, he hasn't won a race since that uh, Dutch Grand Prix where Norris retired, and Norris has
Mm-hmm.
beaten him in every single race since.
Yeah.
Every single race, Norris has been ahead of him without fail, and that's just been a real change of attitude, I think, from Lando. That has been a massive benefit for him because it's almost like he's got a little bit in Piastri's head now because Piastri can't seem to beat him at the minute, and he's not even near him, Luke, wasn't he? I mean, if you think about it,
Yeah.
with the gaps in Mexico, it was quite alarming, really, for Oscar in terms of how far behind he was. I know it's obviously nature of the circuit, but it was pretty crazy.
No, absolutely. And it's just at this point in time, like I'm sure that Piastri is also just kind of like kicking himself in the shin for ultimately like not finishing at Baku, especially.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know where he would have finished, but even if he had found himself finishing like close to Norris, like in that P7, P8, that still would have been. I mean, Norris wouldn't be 1 point ahead. That's all I'm trying to say. Even if he finished P8 in Baku, just behind Norris, he would have still had 3 points at this, like 3 points at this moment, as a buffer. And so I'm sure Piastri's kicking himself in the shin for that. We've got to be incredibly frustrating when now the championship, is this tight and you've been passed by your teammate who most of the season he was ahead by a good, I don't know, most of the season he was ahead by 20 plus points, up until like, yeah, basically these last six races. It's definitely a big turnaround, and I feel kind of bad for him, but I'm hoping, Piastri can still stick with it at the end of the day.
Yeah, I get what you're saying because it's also you feel like when someone's led the championship for this long, it's almost like it's their championship, but it never quite works as simple as that. I mean, I said it in the last podcast. This season reminds me a lot of 2010, where in
Mm-hmm.
2010 you had Weber and Alonso leading that championship, dicing it out for pretty much 90% of that season. And Vettel only really came into the picture right at the very, very end and ended up winning it, and only led the championship once he'd actually won it. Who's to say that could happen again with a certain Max Verstappen? I think that's a real possibility, depending on
Yeah.
obviously what happens in Brazil. But for Oscar, yeah, he really now needs to lick his wounds and come back in Brazil just a different driver almost because at the minute he seems very, I don't know, he's just all over the place, just not there in terms of pace. I think that's the biggest thing, Luke. We've said many times this year that this is a bit of a qualifying championship. Qualifying is so important with these cars. Piastri
Yeah,
again had
definitely.
bad quality, and it affected them in the race, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, it is a quality championship. It's just, I mean, I don't know once again where that kind of confidence went that, Piastri had. It's just it's gone somewhere, and I hope the team can figure it out. But like I said, it's not like Lando Norris wants him to figure it out.
I know.
Lando Norris is definitely, I'm sure Lando Norris is superbly happy being up where he is right now, but I don't think Oscar has qualified past. I don't think he's qualified on the podium for a minute now. I'd have to double check. but like it's been a long time since we've seen him doing well in qualifying. And granted, I'd say Norris has always been a little better in qualifying, but like we're not talking by a significant margin. It's just usually it's closer than it has been. It's been rough, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think the thing with a lot of this as well is the last two circuits we've had, Mexico and Kota, they've both been quite hot races, and the tracks themselves are quite slippery circuits. They're not exactly high on grip compared to
Mhm.
some of the other tracks we go to. So they really should be like the bread and butter for the McLaren car in terms of pure pace, because everyone can admit in terms of the other teams that they can't match McLaren in terms of the tire saving and the ability that the McLaren has to keep the tires in the right window. So
Mhm.
you'd think the last two races should have been quite easy home runs for them if you're thinking of how they were earlier in the season, but they haven't. And obviously, mainly that being for Piastri. Obviously, Norris has still had good results, but you would have
Right.
expected both of them to be pretty damn dominant and controlling it at the very front, and that's just not happened. And yeah, I
Mhm.
think for Piastri, a lot of all this started at Baku for me, and then it's just then been isolated incidents after that, like Norris having his wheel banging thing with Piastri at the beginning of Singapore really
Mhm.
annoyed Piastri. Piastri then the next race goes and crashes into his teammate, and the whole pile up in the sprint. Then kind of has a bad main race. It's just like a snowball effect, I feel, at the minute, and I just feel he has to get a good result to just shake that off, even if it's a podium, Luke. Because to be honest, it's crazy to think that he was actually nowhere near getting a podium in that Mexico race, if I'm correct in saying.
Yeah, actually, you're yeah, definitely. He wasn't anywhere near it. It's been crazy. That's actually the best way to put it. I can't say, and I want to give a little bit of highlight to Max Verstappen now too. It's like I can't say that I think Piastri is going to be able to hold him off if
Mm.
his current form prevails or both of their current forms prevail. We're still seeing Max Verstappen winning when we're still seeing Piastri faltering. So I gotta ask you too. Do you think that actually Piastri has a chance at falling into third in the drivers' championship from first? Verstappen still does have a mathematical chance, but I mean, obviously he's still a bit further behind. But I think the difference is like 30 something points. I think. So I mean, do you think it's possible?
Yeah, it was a good question put by B29 in the Discord of like, is Piastri going to finish third in a two-horse race? And I think I mm, I don't know. I think considering his record last year at these tracks, that wouldn't fill me with confidence because he seemed to struggle a lot with that these particular circuits last year. I do think that Vegas race that's coming up is going to be a real struggle for the two McLarens. We saw that
Yeah, I
last
don't
year.
agree.
That is not a good circuit for that car, and I expect Mercedes and the Red Bulls to be ahead of them at that track. So I
Oh
say it
yeah,
again. I think Brazil is a real vital race for Piastri to get an important, good result on the board because there's probably going to be more pain to come by the time they go to Vegas. So my answer to the question is I think yes. I think Piastri, the way he is going at the minute, absolutely could be third in a two-horse race. And I don't know whether Max or Lando would win the championship right now. I think after that Mexico result, my mind would maybe start to sway more towards Lando because of the nature of it. But that is still a mystery. I think for Piastri, he's really the one on the back foot, which is stating the obvious, obviously, at the moment. But I can't see where it's coming, Luke, in terms of where is that moment's going to come where Piastri goes and takes pole position and then goes and wins the race. That driver seems to be a little bit, disappeared at the moment.
right. No, yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely a lot of. I mean, if he's not feeling the pressure, I'm
Yeah,
astonished. But there's definitely a lot of pressure on him right now.
absolutely. And for such a kind of cold, calculated driver before, it is definitely not the case right now. But in terms of Verstappen, he was obviously he recovered to that third place finish and really put the pressure on Leclerc at the end for the second place spot. But he had quite a eventful race, you'd have to say, in Mexico, but not necessarily for the right reasons, because it started off with this kind of wild four-way scrap into the first corner, which you just love Mexico for that. I said about it on the preview pod. That's the best thing about Mexico is the first lap, run into turn one, you're almost guaranteed. I mean, like, we were all saying about it. Go on, sorry.
No, I was gonna say exactly like you said. There's guaranteed something to happen.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah,
same thing as Coda. The best two, the best T1s in basically the entire season.
yeah, totally. And we were all saying it in the Discord. We were like, something's going to happen here. Something's going to. Oh, I know in particular, I was definitely, pushing that kind of, um, hype train. But I mean, it more than delivered. I don't think anyone expected how that was going to happen. But Verstappen was almost trying a little bit what he did in 2021, Luke, where he went around the outside of both Mercs in that year because he got so late on the brakes. But I think the problem for him this time, he was a little bit on the curb and almost was squeezing himself into that gap, into that first corner. And I don't know whether the Ferrari moved or what to force him there, but obviously braking on the curb instead of the track is probably never going to end well. And
Yeah.
which didn't. And I have to say, look, I actually thought it was pretty good. Kind of, I don't know. You can't call it rally driving because it's an F1 car, but I mean, he was full on having a kind of judged the whole slide of the car over that grass. And I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
another driver would put that in the barrier, wouldn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I remember seeing some talk about this of like whether it was like it was a question posed on Twitter, I think, and it was like, was that luck or car control? And I was like, I have to say, I think that one honestly was car control. Maybe there's a little bit of luck in it, but yeah, the fact that he was able to modulate it just so perfectly, it was pretty impressive. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, because he gets off the brakes as soon as he hits the grass, and then as soon as he gets back on the tarmac, again, kind of accelerates just to get the car. I mean, yeah, it was a, a ballsy move, but it was like he kind of got away with it. We have to say that. I mean, in another situation, that's championship over, isn't it? I mean, if he goes in the barrier there,
Oh
um,
yeah, definitely.
but this is what you got to do, and that actually brought a lot of controversy at the start of the race because he rejoined the circuit in third and then was passed by Hamilton anyways in the next corner or so. But Leclerc himself cut across turn two to maintain position. Actually, he jumped ahead of Norris and he gave back a position. And the likes of George Russell was really unhappy about this behind and complaining on the radio that they should either get a penalty for that or give all the positions back. What do you think about that first corner and particularly the opening lap at Mexico, Luke? Is that something they need to change there, or is that a change of the rules that needs to happen in terms of if you go off the track, do you just give back what you've gained, or should you give back more and what you've almost protected, if you like, by going off the circuit? You have to give those positions as well.
It's a really good question. Honestly, I think it's hard. It's like I hate to say, oh, it's a case by case basis, but like it kind of is. But also, I think there's just a big flaw in just Formula One's rules there in general. It's just we hear so much about like how Verstappen honestly like manipulates the rules, arguably, which arguably he does. But like he follows the letter, and then that's why he can get a corner, even though he's maybe not actually like, even though he may be still like fighting for position in it. That's something I hate. So like, I wish I didn't have to say that it's a case by case basis, but it honestly is. Like specifically there at Mexico with turn one and turn two, like you really can't change all that much about it. It's not bad as is. It's just I don't know. It's really tough. Like the penalties that went out, I think were ultimately fair. Maybe a little harsh with Hamilton specifically, like a little bit later on in the lap. But like the rules applied fine, and Russell doesn't really have a reason to complain. To be fair, I thought him saying anything was stupid. Just a brief side on that. Just a brief side
he
on that. I was to say him
he
complaining was
tried
dumb.
it. Yeah.
He did, but I don't think he was quite in the right there.
I think that's the thing. It's a bit of a tricky corner to sort because it's at the end of a 200 plus miles per hour straight, and you're really
Right.
braking heavy into that first corner. And
Hmm.
if you put gravel there, then you'd have cars rolling over if they had a brake failure or something. They'd hit the gravel and then they'd roll, which we don't want that.
Of course.
We've had runoff there before. Absolutely doesn't work because it's even worse of a problem. I mean, what can you do? Make the grass thicker or something? It's like it's just an impossible task of trying to solve that corner. We've been going to Mexico for probably 10 years now, I want to say, off the top of my head, and
Something like
they've
that.
never really fixed it. And I don't know. I think it's almost like they have to just accept it, and that's just what happens. I mean, I remember this actually a little bit, Luke. This is a bit of a niche comparison, but I
Go for it.
remember with the Sochi circuit, you had this similar problem because it was
Hmm.
run off there, and quite a few drivers, particularly Fernando Alonso, I think, in the last year of that track being on the calendar, would deliberately go overshoot the first corner and then rejoin and gain positions. And it's
Right.
like it's the same problem again where they need something to kind of control it a little bit, because what if we rock up to this race next year and the race leader and everyone else just decides, screw the track, we're all going straight on, because we know that if we bail out, then you're going to either at least maintain your position. You can try and make the overtake, but if I'm not going to make
Mhm.
it, I'll just shoot across and I'll keep the position.
Right. It's a good question. I mean, you have a good point. Honestly, it's really tough. And then I just want to go a little bit more into it, which is just regarding the rules and the penalties as well. It's just like I think it's just dumb, like that they read that I think it's like dumb that Hamilton ultimately like to be completely fair, I think it's dumb that he didn't take the correct escape road at turn four. Like I understand his penalty for that, ultimately still getting the 10 seconds, but it's like I also recognize the fact that like what else was he really supposed to do? At the beginning of lap six, it's like Verstappen pushed him way off to begin with. He technically gave him the position back, but immediately fought him again. It's like Verstappen himself went off the track. Like in that little bit, he didn't actually let Hamilton really by. And I don't know. It's just just the beginning of the question was how do we change those racing standards and take care of it? We can't. Besides, maybe the stewards were moving or like the stewards like being willing to change the rules around who has the corner, because you shouldn't. There is some situations where, okay, yeah, you might be fully in the wrong because this person has the corner, but like people should be able to go side by side and not be scared because the person technically ahead can actually just go straight on and you'd be in the wrong because you were the car behind. It's just so dumb. And I mean, I would definitely say that this race highlighted that more than a little bit.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, they have to be careful what they do, because I think Mexico is actually a pretty underrated circuit for racing. Like when we
Mhm.
get it at that track, it's actually pretty good. And what you wouldn't want is something like what we have at Imola, for example, at the first corner there, where it's surrounded by
Right.
gravel and high curbs, which, to be fair, Mexico has high curbs as well. But
Mhm.
you're almost in fear of, if you try and overtake that's a bit too risky, you're going to end up in the gravel. So no one
Right.
tries the same kind of moves as you get in Mexico, because the consequences are so much worse. And okay, yes, in terms of fairness, maybe that's the best way. But the problem here is, you know, or with that, shall I say, is people then just don't try anything, and it's an
Yeah.
entertainment thing. And I'd rather see Hamilton and Verstappen battling it out like that, and there's a bit of, controversy attached with it, but at least we get the racing. I'll take that over nothing. And obviously, this was probably the most controversial moment of the race, I'd say, Hamilton getting that penalty. But I think my opinion on that is I just think he made the mistake of not using the runoff. Um, Kind
Yeah.
of a little bit like you're saying, is if he went on that bit of tarmac, he wouldn't have got a penalty.
Mhm.
If you follow the guidelines, then you're in the clear. But because he didn't, and he started on it, and then just was like,
Right.
you know what, I'll just take a tighter angle across the grass. it just meant he was going to get that penalty. I mean, the 10 seconds was quite a big penalty, and it did destroy his race as well.
But it's just standard for that. And it's just like, yeah, I agree. That 10 seconds, he wouldn't have lost 10 seconds if he had just used the escape road. And sure, Verstappen and Russell ultimately would have been closer. But I mean, that's once again, you still wouldn't have lost 10 seconds. You would have been
Mm.
a lot more competitive later on in the race. Like, honestly, it's very possible he could have been on for a podium even by the end of it. But, like, instead, he finished a lot lower than, well, a lot lower than I think he should have.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It was a heat of the moment kind of thing, really, because Verstappen and Hamilton, I mean, by the time Hamilton retires, them two have had a lot of kind of wheel to wheel moments, if you like. And
Oh,
I do
definitely.
kind of feel in more recent years, apart from maybe that one in Hungary where Verstappen went flying in the air, um, I think most of the time Max has been kind of getting the better of him a little bit in those moments, mainly because of the car advantage, in fairness to Lewis. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think, like, you wonder if with some of the drivers, they think of that a little bit in those moments of, like, oh, I've had so many incidents with him before, or, whatever. I'm really going to make sure that I don't let him pass this time. And it did seem a bit like that from Lewis. Well, I kind of thought is that he really broke late, and then they both actually were going wide anyway.
No,
So,
that's
but
fair.
you'd have to say though, Luke, it was a missed opportunity for him because he was quick
Definitely
in
was.
qualifying.
Oh yeah, the Ferraris absolutely outpaced, or not everybody, but the Ferraris were definitely the class of the field right after Norris. It was I was so happy to see that. Like I remember I was just driving to D&D and I was like listening. I just had my phone connected to the Bluetooth, and I was just listening to it in Q2, and I was like, oh shoot, yeah, the Ferraris are doing really really well. Then 10 minutes later, I'm almost there, and it's like talking about it and like how Leclerc got second. I was like, yes! I was like, yes, let's go. Come on, Hamilton. Like, I was so hyped. And I mean, I don't really think that's going to happen again anytime soon, but oh, God. Did so well this weekend. They got the strategy, was fine. Like, sure, Verstappen would have caught up at the end of Leclerc, but whatever, it happens, but they still did well with the strategy at the end of the day. They, you know, boxed at the right time. Leclerc performed well. That's just that one blunder with Lewis kind of unfortunately threw off the whole weekend.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it, how Ferrari were, again, like in Kota, because they had a pretty good performance there as well, I'm pretty sure. Um,
Mhm.
weird, these last two races, they seem to have came alive a little bit, because I kind of thought, particularly in Austin, wow, there's no way they're going to maintain them positions because of the whole LICO that they've had to do in recent races, and, there's just no way they'll be able to maintain it. And they did. And then in Mexico, great qualifying. And yeah, I'm kind of thinking, wow, Ferrari are quite competitive here. However, I think once, you get into longer runs, whatever, they'll start to fall away. But they didn't. Leclerc was really kind of in no man's land for a while in that race. And I tell you, if Verstappen wasn't on that medium to soft strategy, I think Leclerc would have been even more comfortable in that second place because I think almost by accident, the Red Bull being on a you know worse attire to start with just set it up nicely for them once everyone got out of the way with their second
Right.
stops to just hunt down Leclerc. But yeah, great result for Charles, and that's his eighth podium I think now of the season off the top of my head, and I really
So
think he's actually had a pretty decent season, especially when you consider Hamilton hasn't had a podium yet this season, and the fact that Leclerc's had that many is quite telling, Luke.
and considering how it started, like I was
Mm.
not super confident at the start of the season with everything. But yeah, Leclerc has definitely been outperforming Hamilton, and I still don't put that much like blame on Hamilton because especially now as I mean, obviously as we just keep going through the season, it's gotten clearer and clearer that Hamilton is catching up. But I mean, as much as I hate that he keeps saying this, and we kind of keep saying, this is kind of been the case. It just seems like, once again, he was unsettled in the car, and that's just been the whole problem with any of these cars this generation. But like I'm still happy. He definitely is catching, or I would definitely, maybe not definitely, but he's definitely performing better. Like, the fact that he got a P3 in qualifying, that was awesome. And I don't
Yeah,
think anybody honestly would have predicted that. Like, I would know I was being kind of silly and saying Leclerc would get pole and Leclerc would win, but like I got a lot closer than that prediction than I thought.
you did.
you know,
He was very
yeah, and
close to
Hamilton
pole.
basically being there. I mean, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that maybe at Vegas or something they end up pulling. They pull something else out of the bag and they end up doing pretty well there too. But obviously Brazil is next, so we have to wait a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is quite easy to say, but if Norris didn't have such a dominant weekend, that would have been the race for Ferrari. I don't think they've got as close, not necessarily in terms of gaps, but in terms of the opportunity of winning a
Mm-hmm.
race this season. That was kind of not far off it being the one. Um, and yeah, I hope, to be honest, that Ferrari get another chance. I think they will at some track this season.
Yeah, I think
We're
so.
running out, we are running out of opportunities of that Ferrari win. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's not too bad now. I think that they needed this because it was looking really rough at certain races this season. And it was just a bit of a season of kind of really forgetting it. And it was almost giving vibes of like 2020 when that car was really, really bad. But it's not as bad as that now. Like this is
No, thank
kind of
God.
just better. The fact that they're actually able to get on the podium. So we'll
Mhm.
see how they go in Brazil. It wasn't necessarily the greatest day for Mercedes, although they were looking pretty good for a point of the race where they were ahead of people like Max and Piastri, and they were
Mhm.
closing in on Ollie Bearman, who, if you're listening to this podcast at this point, you'd be like, why the hell have you not mentioned him yet? But we will get on to Ollie Bearman later. But Mercedes had a bit of, yeah, I think it all started a little bit when they had this team order trouble of like, do we let Russell through? Do we not? And this is almost giving vibes of Ferrari a few years ago, where it's like, make the damn decision.
Mhm.
And they
Mhm.
eventually did it, but I felt like they lost so much time from that, Luke.
That's definitely one of the things that contributed to it. And then it just seems that they didn't have the pace on those, like as they got on, or as they did those longer runs. They weren't bad for their pace, but it's like, yeah, they really weren't able to capitalize on their qualifying positions at all. Ultimately, Antonelli finishing ahead of Russell when
Yeah.
Russell qualified fourth. It's like Russell lost three positions in the race. It's really, I almost want to say it, I want to say it's pretty disappointing. I think that honestly, from the way things had started, Russell should have been on for a podium. I think he should have been fighting with Max and Leclerc at the end. But I don't know if it was a problem with pace at the end of the day, or just because that longer stint, or yeah, like you were talking, just this team being silly, and then ultimately, Antonelli even take the place back. It just felt like it wasn't a very, I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's not confident in the way that the car wasn't performing, but I mean like the team and the calls that they were making, they weren't very confident in their choices, especially with in this specific case, what driver should lead. It was definitely it felt a little weird to me.
Yeah, I felt like there was just an element of a lack of, I don't know, distinct, I don't know, decisive, shall I say, decision making in the whole process. And the George ended up getting super flustered. I would say that he probably, you know, damaged his tires actually and didn't really look after them by the time he
Probably.
got past Antonelli, and then after that, and almost screwed himself, which is almost a little bit silly to do that. But he basically then just scuppered himself and then allowed, obviously, the perfect opportunity for Antonelli to be allowed back through because he had cooked his tires. So you're right,
Yeah.
Luke. He didn't have a good race by his standards this season because he's had a good season. And this is obviously the first time Antonelli has beaten George Russell this season, which
Yeah.
is mad to say that. It's mad to say that Russell was on for, well, he was 15-0 at this point. Um, and Antonelli's finally done it. I don't think I ever expected it to take till Mexico, Luke, for this to happen. But I mean, he had a decent drive, but I mean, he'll be glad that didn't stay at a zero. That is for sure.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it's I'm sure it's justifying Mercedes' choice to finally give them both contracts, and to keep them on board. Like at the very least they were competitive with one another. And I can't wait to see them continue to be competitive with one another. I can tell that they're both definitely dedicated to Mercedes at this point, but I'm happy that Antonelli is showing is showing some competition and is, putting his elbows out a little bit with Russell because that's kind of what you need as a rookie sometimes. You need to get your elbows out. You need to prove to your team, what you got in it or what you got in you. And I think Antonelli has definitely accomplished that.
And speaking of another rookie, he's kind of technically not a rookie in my eyes because to think that he actually raced multiple times actually last season. Obviously, the famous debut he had at Saudi last year, and then obviously
Oh,
the few cameos at the end of the season. But a certain Ollie Bearman in his first full season of F1 scoring a P4 finish, the joint best ever result for Haas in their history in Formula One. What a drive that was. I mean, to provide a bit more context, he obviously kind of was maybe more sitting back at the start, had a good qualifying, was well inside Q3, but maybe just let the chaos happen in front of him at the start of the race, but then managed to just pick up the places through penalties for Hamilton and other people pitting, and he was in third for a while of that race. And it was only until really the second half when others on a better strategy or just having more pace were able to pick him off. But I mean, there was a point at the very beginning when Verstappen and Hamilton had their moment. I'm pretty sure. You had Ollie Bearman there trying to dive it down the inside on Max as well. I mean, it's like amazing drive, really. You'd have to say, Luke, to also hold off Piastri at the end.
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, hats off to him. He did quite well. P10 to P4, like in fighting
In a Haas.
Verstappen and yeah, exactly. In the Haas, it's really, really, really impressive and really great to see because I'm glad, it just shows that he feels confident in the car. And it's been a while since I'd say that team has had really anything major to celebrate, so this is definitely a cause for celebration, especially here at the end of the season. And it's not bad for them in any way, especially with their constructors. Like, this is this is a nice little chunk of points for them. They're still a bit behind Aston Martin, but it brings them ever closer because that battle for sixth is still ongoing. We have Racing Bulls with I'll look it up. Oh yeah, we have Racing Bulls with 72, Aston Martin with 69, Haas with 62, and Sauber with 60. It's like that fight for sixth place is still very alive right now, and like every single driver on each of those teams is contributing to it, except maybe Lance Stroll. But everybody else is doing fantastic. You basically have 8 drivers competing every single weekend the hardest that they can. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Haas are right back in the mix for that. What did you say? Sorry, sixth place. I think we're saying,
Sixth
aren't we?
place.
Yeah, the battle for
Yeah, sixth
sixth.
place.
Haas are very much back in it. I think they brought a smallish upgrade. I think. Well, I don't even know if it was small. It clearly has made a big difference in Cota because they do seem to like
Mhm.
to bring upgrades at their home race, and it's proven to give them just another chance in that constructors battle. It's given me vibes almost in a different way, but Alpine coming out of nowhere last season, where they had that crazy result at Brazil, and all of a sudden, a really bang average season turned into a decent season because they jumped up a bunch of teams in the constructors. And with the
Oh yeah.
form Ollie Bearman's had, and Ocon as well, just nipping into the points as well, just to help that, they're
Mhm.
really right there now. And I mean, Sauber, they'll be gutted in some sense that they're back down into ninth because they've had a decent recovery themselves this season
Oh yeah,
with,
absolutely.
some of their results. And yeah, I don't know. If I feel like we need to almost answer this every podcast at the minute because it's chopping and changing, but who is your pick for that sixth place spot right now, Luke?
Oh, God, I hate it so much because yeah, you're right. It really does come up a lot, and it's so incredibly close. I gotta say, I still think that I don't know. God. I still want to say that Haas probably has the best chance.
Really?
But that's just because, yeah, recently Racing Bulls had, I'd say, hasn't really been anywhere. Aston Martin, we're still running on the back of, it's still running off of Fernando Alonso. Haas, honestly, Esteban Ocon and Ollie Bearman. I mean, Haas and Sauber, realistically, I think could make up these points in this last bit of the season because I really just don't think those V carbs are anywhere. I mean, if I pull up how many
Yeah.
points they've gotten in the past couple of races, I'll double check real quick just to see. Um,
It's not been great.
let's see. Yeah, Sauber. I mean, let's say I'll do the past three races, right? Sauber's brought in 5 points in the last three races. VCAR was brought in nothing. Aston Martin's brought in seven. Singapore benefited them a bit, and then Haas has brought in, let's see here, 18.
Yeah.
So it's like Haas bringing in 18 points in the last three races, and then all of them had a brief slump just before that. Yeah, I would definitely say that they have a good chance. VCarb is just, they're doing fine, but they just don't have the pace anymore. That's just it.
Yeah, I think they've really fell off quite a bit, and it's starting to affect my whole thinking of who's been the best rookie this season with the likes of Hadger, because he really hasn't had a good run now of any kind of decent points for a while.
Mhm.
And Lawson was, you know, doing a bit better and getting, actually quite close to Hadger in the driver standings. And I mean, he's still kind of, well, yeah, he is. I mean, he's only 9 points behind him as I look at it now. I mean, then the drivers, it's super close. You're 10th place on first, well, ninth place even. Hulkenberg in ninth on 41 points, all the way down to Sonoda in 17th on 28. That's not a lot, Luke. I mean, that can change
No.
just from a result like Bearman had in Mexico. And then if you finish in the top 10 of the standings, you've had a pretty good season as a midfield driver.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really interesting, actually. I didn't really quite realize how close that all is. So
Hmm.
that'll skew my kind of thoughts on Hadger's season. I think he'll still end up in the Red Bull, probably. But for Hadger, he needs to get himself a bit more in them points game for the sake of RB's constructors, because it all matters. And yeah, that sixth place and ninth place is a big difference for some of these teams. I mean, how about Aston Martin? They're a team that have always been in that sixth, seventh spot all season long, and obviously they are thinking ahead, as every team are now. But they'll be gutted, wouldn't they, if they finish ninth in the constructors? I mean, that's a real disappointing season for them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. And I don't think it's impossible at this point. It's just Stroll hasn't brought in any points since way earlier in the season, and everybody else is at least doing consistently. I'd still say I'd still say that V Carb is not doing as hot as we thought they would. And I don't know. Yeah, Aston Martin is just hanging in there at this point, I think. Uh, just that lack of Stroll being competitive really kind of deals a lot of, I mean, it just does a lot of harm to them, honestly, because there's not much you can supplement with. You can't, you could probably make 100 upgrade packages for him, and I don't think it would change. He just doesn't quite have the same raw pace as most other drivers on the grid. I mean, I'm not going to comedically hate on him right now, but it's been, I think, 5 or 6 races since he's got points, and I'll still give him kudos for the ones he has got, but it's really just not enough, I feel like, most of the time, because it's just the results are typically just uninspiring. His highest being, I think, sixth this season, and then I think the other points he's gotten has been from being like, seventh to 10th. It's not really that great. His highs aren't that high. That sixth is great, but I don't know. It's tough at the end of the day, because I still think that's technically higher than anything Fernando Alonso's gotten, or Alonso has like tied him for sixth. But I don't know. I'd have to double check on that. It's just a little frustrating to me, because that Aston Martin seat, I feel like, should still go to somebody else who just has a higher ceiling, and somebody else who can train for it, and somebody else who probably will contribute better to development. I think there's a lot of other drivers that honestly could do a better job than Stroll in just so many ways at this point.
Well, that's the thing, and they'll obviously, if they have a contending car for the championship in future years, they most likely will have to eventually make that decision. But again, kind of with that standings thing, I mean, you're saying Stroll, he's right in the thick of it with that battle, if you like, and the likes of Sainz and Bearman scoring their really good results in the second half of the season. Again, you could maybe also say Hadger. It really kind of skewed that midfield fight. I mean, if you think about it, Hulkenberg, Hadger, Sainz, and Bearman have all had individual great races. It's not like, say, they've had really consistent, top five finishes this season. And that's really kind of boosted their points tallies in terms of who is where in that standings. They only really the likes of Alonso, who's not had an amazing result, and yet he's right in the mix for that ninth place spot here. It's, yeah, I think quite fascinating. And obviously with Behrman's result in Mexico, he's now ahead of Ocon in the standings. And I would have never thought that was going to happen this season. Not like Ocon's had an amazing season himself, but he's definitely, probably on average, had a better season than Bearman. But it's crazy how things can suddenly change, can't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely, I mean, I think it's only like a 2 or 3 point difference, but still, it's nice to see that it's like at least we have one rookie who is now beating their teammate. You know, I guess actually technically Isaac Hadjar as well. I was just thinking about Sonoda, but I guess like yeah, Isaac Hadjar and then Behrman both doing fairly well, beating their teammates at this point. Like yeah, it's definitely impressive.
I mean, if you were to pick of the rookies who you think has had the best season of all of them, who would you go for?
I want to say I'd say the best is whoever's beating their teammate by the most amount, and I'm gonna have to give it to. I think I'm gonna have to give it to Isaac Hadjar at the end of the day because he was out. He was outperforming Sonoda way earlier in the season, and or at least around the same. And then he has absolutely crushed Lawson. Lawson has caught up a little bit in this the latter half of the season that we're in now, but it hasn't been anything significant. And I gotta say, yeah, Hadjar has definitely still impressed both of us at the end of the day. And then probably close, but and then honestly, everybody else is pretty much tied for me. Like Antonelli, he's up against George Russell and up against some of the higher cars in the grid. I never expected him to do that well. I don't remember what our beginning of the season predictions were, but I can guarantee you either they were super wrong or like Antonelli's right on the money. But anyways, it's like so he's doing well as just a general benchmark, and then Jack doing he's not in the sport anymore. Colin Pinto doing kind of rough. Pierre Gat or
Well,
get like Bortoletto doing well against Hulkenberg. He's staying competitive. Behrman, you can say the exact same thing. So I'd say everybody's just about tied besides Hajar.
yeah, I mean, to be fair to Franco Colapinto, I think he's been dealt quite a tough hand there with the car that he's
Hmm.
in. And Gasly's no bad driver himself. But I think the head to
Yeah.
head between them two is pretty close now. So I I think like I'd give Colapinto at least next year and see where the Alpine is, and then like it's kind of fair to judge him in my eyes. I'm not saying he's been good at all, but I feel like he's been getting a bit of a tough time off quite a lot of people, and it's like, well, really, if Bortoletto, for example, was in that Alpine, he probably wouldn't be able to drag much else out of it as well. But so we'll just see. But I think, yeah, Gabby Bortoletto, he could still again jump up the standings quite a bit. I think he's had a very good season as well. But I'll agree with you, Luke. I think Hadger has had the best season of the rookies, but it's not quite as much difference now as it was maybe earlier in the season
Yeah.
where it was like, by far he was the best. So, right, I think that's pretty much everything from the Brazilian Grand Prix. The driver I mentioned actually right there at the end, Bortoleto, was the final driver to score points in Brazil. Again, finally himself getting into the points after quite a long wait. But then the rest of the field were all quite far back. We see that quite a bit in Mexico where the gaps are pretty big. And yeah, that kind of fight for the final points is going to have some real significant importance now in these closing races of the season. And speaking of closing races, we have 4 to go. And next up is the Brazilian Grand Prix. And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I think there's not many people on this planet who don't like the Brazilian Grand Prix. I think it's one of the season highlights, not only just because of how amazing of a country Brazil is and the kind of uniqueness of the circuit of Interlagos. It provides great racing. We have seen some absolute classics over the years in Sao Paulo. Anything that comes to mind straight away, Luke, of kind of classic Brazil races from over the years? I think they call it the Sao Paulo Grand Prix this year, so I keep saying Brazil. It's technically not, but you know what I mean. What's the classic races that come to mind?
It's almost hard to say. I mean, I want to say like class. Oh God, there's so many that's a classic, and that's the hardest part. Is honestly, you go down the list and name like 5 of them. Uh, Honestly, I'm going to go ahead and take just a little bit of a different take. Honestly, I'm going to go ahead and say last year, that entire weekend was nuts. I remember the sprint qual. I remember especially like the qualifying for the race was just ridiculous. I remember the starting grid was all types of messed up. I mean, Sonoda was like qualified P3 in the stinking RB at the time. Esteban Ocon was just below him, and Liam Lawson was up there. It was a whole mix-up. So honestly, it may not be a classic quite yet, but I think it will be a future classic, or at least a future race that people are like, that was definitely interesting. I'm going to go ahead and say actually last year was really really interesting.
Oh yeah, I do actually think the 2024 race at Brazil, I think that was an instant classic, and I think what people forget is actually the second half of that race wasn't actually that exciting because by that point,
Yeah.
after the red flag and safety cars, and once Max took the lead, it had settled down for a bit. But those first 25 laps or so were unbelievable. Like when you look
Yeah.
at that back and some of the moves Verstappen was making and the drama of that race, you had like Norris and Russell at the very front, and then a whole bunch of different drivers that were kind of up there in the top ends of the points. We had so many cars spinning off, but there was one man, Max Verstappen, who did not make a mistake that entire race, and whether it was Hamilton, Piastri, he was picking them off. I mean, it was only Leclerc that he got up to, and he kind of didn't really get past until obviously the chaos that came after. But it was, people talk about like certain drives going down in history. I actually think that drive was the defining moment of his championship last season, and I think
Definitely
that
one of them.
whole when he got out the car and kind of put his arms in the air after winning that race, you just knew right there, Luke, that was the championship done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I really thought that result last season, I mean, yeah, like I say, there's certain drives that you just have to appreciate how unstoppable they are. And obviously, he benefited a lot from the safety car and red flag good fortune last year, and that can't be forgotten as well. But yeah, it was one of those drives. I mean, here's a question for you, Luke. Which drive do you think was better, Verstappen in 2016 or Verstappen in 2024?
That's tough. I have to say, ooh, crap, that's actually really tough. I'm gonna say probably 2016, but it's almost because of what you
Really?
mentioned earlier. After that red flag, that last half of the race was pretty nothing, And so honestly, I think that's just yeah, I think that's gonna be the biggest thing that changes it. I definitely think that if there was a little bit more competition at the front end last year, probably would have put it a little bit higher. But yeah, I think ultimately 2016 was definitely really impressive. And, it was Max Verstappen proving himself at the Red Bull, proving why he ultimately was moved there. So it's definitely a little bit more impactful for his career as well.
Yeah, because I guess that's the thing with the 2016 one. He's also at a very different point of his career, and against
Yeah.
those far superior Mercedes cars that were, pretty unstoppable in 2016 in terms of results. And yeah, for him to have that kind of race go around the outside of Rosberg as well, and around turn 3, it was a pretty mega drive. And yeah, I think he obviously has a good hunting ground. We've also had other crazy moments. I mean, I'll rattle through them here, but we've had a Magnussen pole position in 2022, which obviously wasn't in the race, but it was still an amazing moment. We also had in 2021 the, well, how could you say it? The quite incredible victory for Lewis Hamilton, coming from last at the beginning of the sprint race all the way to winning in the main Grand Prix. And, the controversy that went with that race as well, with Verstappen and Hamilton dueling it out. We then also had in 2020 the whole Albon collision when he was really in the mix in that race with Hamilton, and Gasly was on the podium in that race, as well as Sainz, actually, his first for McLaren. We've had, again, Verstappen collide with Ocon in 2018, I think that was, when, that was Ocon a lap down and kind of colliding with him. I can remember, there was that race in 2012 where we had Vettel be crowned champion after facing the wrong way at the end of the first lap. And the most heartbreaking moment ever in that race when Nico Hulkenberg collided with Lewis Hamilton when fighting for the win of all things. Nico Hulkenberg in a friggin' Force India fighting for the victory. And yeah, I could go on and on. The last one I'll mention is obviously Hamilton's championship win in 2008 as well, winning that on the final lap. And I probably forgot something else. But long story short, it's absolutely stacked with iconic moments. And the question is, are we going to see another iconic moment this weekend?
Ooh, that's a
Or
great
next weekend, shall I
question.
say?
Next weekend, but yeah, I was gonna say, it's definitely possible. I mean, this could be where, this honestly could be where Norris cements the championship. This is where, Verstappen could make the comeback of a lifetime. Like, this could definitely be a historic championship, or sorry, not historic championship. This could definitely be a historic race and definitely could matter in this championship. Whether or not we'll get another instant classic, it's kind of, once again, it's yet to be seen. We'll kind of see once we get through
Give us a bit of
qualifying
rain.
and exactly, yeah. Well, so we'll kind of see once we get through qualifying and we get through everything else. But I do expect good racing at the very least. So we don't have a sprint. This isn't a sprint race
It
this time
is.
around,
It
is it?
is.
It is
Yeah.
okay. I thought
Yeah.
okay. Oh yeah, you're right. It is. That, I mean, that always throws a lot of drivers for a loop, and so especially if we are getting rainy weather. I mean, I'm not really sure what the predictions are right now, but if we do get that rainy weather, I mean, I don't necessarily know if we'll get the same kind of chaos as last year, but it's definitely possible. And the sprints, the sprints definitely change up a lot.
Yeah. I haven't had a check of the weather just yet myself, but you can always be sure that rain is never far away in Brazil, and you'd have to say that kind
Yeah.
of bit of the world, if you like, at the minute. If the race was this weekend, obviously with the awful stuff that's been happening in Jamaica, being quite a bit
Mhm.
further up, obviously, but it still, will affect that part of the world. It would have been a pretty soaking wet race this weekend if that race was held. We don't know. Maybe by next weekend, rain and things like that have kind of gone through, and it'll be dry. But even if it is dry, we've still seen great racing at Interlagos, and it will be fascinating to see what happens. I'm just going to pick up on something that you said there. Actually, you said if Norris could cement his kind of championship position from this race, do you see something like that potentially happening in Brazil? And what would it take for Norris to really kind of be in the best possible position with 3 races to go?
Mhm. I mean, could definitely put him in the best. This definitely could put him in the best possible position. It's just like if we still see competition from the Ferraris this weekend, and we see competition from the Mercedes. If it's anything like what we got in Mexico, it's definitely possible that, um, it's definitely possible that ultimately Verstappen and Piastri might have a hard time coming up through the pack because Piastri, like we've been talking about, hasn't had a great string of qualifying performances. And for Verstappen, the Red Bull is still a good car, and it's definitely, I'd say, probably the second best in the field at this point in time. but it still has its faults. And ultimately, Leclerc is also, Leclerc is definitely a dab hand at this track, and you can never filter him out. You can never really get rid of Lewis Hamilton either here, especially with the sprint weekend. Like, that also can change a lot because we've seen the Red Bull suffering at different points in the season from just a lack of setup. When they don't have enough time to get things dialed in. We know it's a tricky car, and that could be, that could play a huge part here, just not being able to get those quirks figured out, especially like now we see Norris feeling more confident in the car. It's like ultimately, ultimately, I think things could get a little mixed up here, and it wouldn't take all that much to do it either. Um, I say like if we just even go to like Coda, with the sprint there, I mean, it was definitely something different, and I kind of got my fingers crossed at the end of the day.
Well, speaking of crossing fingers, we might have to do that a bit for the predictions for the Brazilian Grand Prix, because if you look at last year, we would have got this incredibly wrong with the two
Oh
Alpines
God,
there
yeah, I remember
on
that.
the podium. So let's see
It was
what happens
embarrassing.
this time. We could be in for a bit of trouble again in terms of our predictions, but we'll go for it anyway. So, Luke, what is your pole position prediction for the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix?
Pole position, I'm honestly going to go ahead and say Lando Norris. He's done pretty decently here in the past, and I still think I definitely think he'll do well. They definitely have the car for it. He just set basically the one of the largest qualifying gaps of the entire season, and the largest, race, like the largest gap to the leader in the whole season. So yeah, I'd say he's coming off of a bit of a hot streak, and if he can just keep up this performance, then I can totally see pole position in his future quite easily, honestly.
Okay, okay. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one for Brazil because it's a very different circuit to the last two that we've had.
Hmm.
Pole position. I'm gonna go with Max Verstappen. I think Verstappen is gonna take pole in Brazil. I think that track could suit the Red Bull a little bit more compared to
Hmm.
Mexico, and he's gonna bounce back, but it'll be a pretty titanic scrap between Norris and Max for pole.
That's fair.
As my watch decides to speak to me for some reason. But anyways, what about your podium prediction, Luke? What do you think for that? Because if you've got Norris on pole, the question is, will he keep that pole position? Well, he'll keep
That's
the
a
pole
great.
position, but will he keep it for the win?
I do think he'll keep it for the win, and then honestly, I'm just going to go ahead and flip the results, or just flip Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. So I'm going to say that Lando Norris is going to be getting the win this week. Max Verstappen is going to take second place, and then Leclerc is going to bring up the third spot in the podium.
Ooh, okay,
Hmm.
okay. So with Leclerc, why do you think he's going to be on the podium again ahead of some of the others?
He's found a lot in the car. He hasn't stopped pushing for the development of it. He's felt that there has been something in it this entire season. So I want to say that, like, and also I feel like it would be kind of justice, or not justice. It would just be very satisfying, especially after I mean, was it or not last year, 2023, like especially like back in 2023, like just basically crashing out in the first lap. Like I'm always going to think that he deserves better and that he can do better. So honestly, just kind of that. I've just got my fingers crossed that he just ultimately is able to take the place, and I think he has a lot of skill. And like I said, that Ferrari, there's definitely something in it, and I think everybody's kind of picking up on it at this point.
Okay. It's quite similar to my prediction. I mean, but if before I say that, no Piastri again.
No Piastri, no Piastri.
Any particular reason?
Same like what I was talking about earlier. He just doesn't look comfortable in the car. If he looked more comfortable, I would be putting him higher, and he just hasn't been. This string of qualifyings has been rough. He hasn't necessarily done well here historically, and granted, it's not like we have much of a judge. He's only been here a couple times with McLaren, but I just don't think he's going to quite have it in him still. I don't think Verstappen is going to be passing him in the championship or anything like that, but I do think that, like I was saying earlier, this could be where Norris cements the championship, essentially. If he gets a race win and Verstappen gets second, that's still a lot of points for Verstappen to try and haul back in 3 races. It'd be really, really difficult at that point.
But that's the point, though, is if Norris wins, it again extends the gap to Verstappen. Verstappen might still be getting on Piastri, but it doesn't matter anymore. It's not about Piastri. It's about both McLarens in terms of closing in on them. So for Max,
True.
he has to win in Brazil. And this is like the longest build-up ever to my predictions, by the way. But what I think will happen is I think he will win in Brazil, but it won't be in a dry race. If it's a dry race, Luke, Norris is going to win this. And I think you're right. He really will put his foot down in terms of the championship and will look like the person who's going to do it. But in a wet race, I think Verstappen will come alive, and it's that equalizer that we've talked before about. A bit of rain just removes some of the difference in cars. And although Norris is good in the wet, I'll hold my ground on that. I think Verstappen, what he's done at this circuit before in the rain, he'll be doing a rain dance, let's say that, before the race, because if it chucks it down, then I think no one's stopping him. So I think Verstappen to win, Norris second, and I'm agreeing with you with Leclerc in third place. So neither of us have got any Mercedes on the podium. Any chance for them?
I mean, I'd say that there's still a chance, but I wouldn't say I'm confident. Russell is never someone you can really discount. Antonelli, I don't think so, but just his first time coming to the track with Mercedes. So, yeah, I wouldn't say Russell is impossible, but still less likely considering Piastri is still faster, Leclerc is still up there. I'd say Hamilton in that Ferrari is honestly a little bit faster than Russell at this point. It's not impossible, but honestly, I'd say it's more likely that we see like Hamilton getting a podium or something like that before Russell. And like I said, not by a huge amount, but I just don't feel the most confident about the Mercedes at this track.
Well, once they've got this one through, I'm almost sure that they're going to have a great result in Las Vegas, because that track should suit them to a T, as long as all things are similar to last year. So let's see then. We'll see what happens this coming weekend in Brazil, and it should be an absolute thriller, because the championship is seriously at stake now. For the likes of Piastri, he needs a good result to grab hold of this championship that he's had a grip of all season long until right at the very end. But that has been this week's podcast. Thank you, Luke, for joining me as always. And if you've enjoyed this episode, you know the score by now. You can subscribe on the TFR YouTube channel, and you can follow us on your audio platform of choice. Let's see then what will happen in Sao Paulo. Will we have another Brazil Classic? Will Norris extend his lead in the championship, or will Verstappen continue to claw back that gap for the top spot? We'll find out, and we'll see you in the next one.